a dramatic statue of a fierce and unlikely heroine.
What she was facing that night was a very strong possibility of death.
The most notorious storage shed in America.
It was bedlam, lots of sirens and emergency vehicles.
And an epic memorial to a vessel that mysteriously vanished beneath the waves.
Why did she go down? Was she attacked?
Sometimes the greatest secrets lie in plain sight. These are monumental mysteries.
Deep in the remote highlands of northwest Arkansas is a charming and picturesque town, which is listed on the National Registry of Historic Places.
There are no two dwellings alike. There are no two streets alike. The whole place is very romantic.
But according to local history expert Keith Scales, this secluded Ozark community owes its unlikely existence to a unique geological feature.
There was no reason for a town to be here at all except for the springs, the magic springs.
Named for its supposedly curative waters, used to treat every manner of ailment, this is the landmark town of Eureka Springs. But of the many stories that have arisen from this therapeutic mecca, there is one that had a truly tragic ending.
Thousands of people came here on the hope that they could be cured, but something went terribly wrong.
What appalling scandal shook the foundation of this mountain retreat to its very core? The 1930s, Eureka Springs. For more than 50 years, the mineral-rich waters of this Arkansas mountain town have drawn countless visitors in search of health and vitality. And one of the biggest local enterprises in the town is the Crescent Hotel. But as the Great Depression hits, the Grand Hotel, along with the rest of the town of Eureka Springs, falls on hard times.
When the Depression came along, the hotel just closed down.
Until one day, when an elegant stranger arrives at the derelict hotel. His name is Norman Baker.
He said that he would like to buy this building and that he promised to restore Eureka Springs to its position as a famous place of healing.
When the deal goes through, Baker throws an extravagant party for local dignitaries on the grounds of the former hotel. And there he reveals his ambitious scheme. He plans to open a hospital on the site, and one he claims will revolutionize medical science.
He came to Eureka Springs to cure the most deadliest scourge of humanity of all, cancer.
Claiming conventional medicine is futile, Baker describes the miracle cure with which he intends to base his treatments. Its name, Secret Remedy Number 5. And thanks to an ambitious direct mail campaign, within months, hundreds of cancer sufferers are flooding into the town of Eureka Springs. And each new patient is anxious to begin their regimen of injections of Secret Remedy Number 5.
He very quickly filled his hospital, so suddenly Eureka Springs rose from the dust, and everybody was making money, and everybody loved Norman Baker.
But the town of Eureka Springs is in for a shocking revelation. One of the local officials who supported Norman Baker in his bid to open his cancer hospital is the influential Arkansas Congressman Claude Fuller. And one day, the congressman receives a troubling letter. It is from the daughter of one of Baker's former patients. The letter accuses Baker of peddling false hope to the desperate victims of the deadly disease.
Fulham started to wonder if perhaps the man was actually a charlatan who was doing a lot more harm to his patients than he was doing good.
Determined to get at the truth, Congressman Fuller launches an inquiry into the hospital and its owner, Norman Baker. What investigators uncover is surprising.
Not only had he never set foot in medical school in his life, but his original success had been in vaudeville. He'd been 10 years on a vaudeville stage doing magic acts and levitating people.
And when they study the content of his Secret Remedy Number 5, What they find is actually a mixture of ground-up watermelon seeds, brown corn silk, peppermint, and carbolic acid. A bizarre concoction that seems to hold little prospect of curing anything. Although his actions appear despicable, it's not clear whether Baker has actually broken the law. But Congressman Fuller is determined to act.
Fuller had been a lawyer, prosecuting attorney, and I think when he decided to go after Baker, it had to be definitive. It couldn't be something that Baker could wriggle out of. They eventually charged him with was a federal crime, misuse of the U.S. mails for fraudulent purposes.
Baker has been suing prospective cancer patients through a constant stream of letters filled with categorical guarantees of a cure. And since the claims are provably false, Baker has committed fraud, mail fraud. And although it seems like a minor charge in light of the horrific facts of the case, the charges stick. On January 24th, 1940, 3 years after he arrived in Eureka Springs, Norman Baker is found guilty.
He was given 4 years in Leavenworth Prison and a $4,000 fine.
There's no way to know for certain how many victims perished under his care. But there are chilling rumors of how he may have concealed the dismal results of his bogus treatments from other patients.
There is an annex that was essentially a pain ward. This is where he would put people who were in so much suffering they were disturbing other people in other parts of the building. And the story is that he had steel shutters on the end of those wards to kind of contain the sounds.
It's said that the bodies of the dead were wheeled out of this ward late at night and incinerated. In the end, the fraudulent administrator is believed to have fleeced more than $4 million from his patients' pockets, or $65 million in today's currency. After serving out his 4-year term in prison, Norman Baker moves to Florida, where he meets a most ironic fate.
His cause of death was cancer of the liver.
6 years after Baker's hospital is closed down, the Grand Crescent Hotel reopens for business. And today, the landmark town of Eureka Springs stands as a symbol of gracious Southern hospitality, but will be forever remembered for the sideshow swindler who peddled hope but delivered only grief. Founded in 1795, the town of Carmel, New York overlooks the majestic Lake Glenida. And amidst the sometimes snowy hills that line the shores of this pristine reservoir is a larger-than-life bronze statue that depicts an unlikely heroine riding side saddle on a galloping steed.
The statue is of a young girl, bent over, fierce look on her face, stick in hand, obviously a girl on a mission.
As author Vincent d'Aquino knows, despite her diminutive stature, this girl possessed colossal amounts of courage.
She took her life in her hands for her country, for freedom.
So who was this brave young girl? And what role did she play in battling the most formidable army of the day? 1777. The War of Independence is in full swing as the North American colonies seek to free themselves from the shackles of the British. One of the key strategic locations in this conflict is the New York Hudson River Valley, a rebel stronghold which connects the colonies in the north to the mid-Atlantic region.
If that area was attacked, it would have cut off the zone between Connecticut and New York.
Among those protecting the area is Colonel Henry Ludington of Dutchess County.
He was in charge of a volunteer force, 400 men.
April 26th. A messenger arrives at the colonel's home with alarming news. British troops have made an assault on Danbury, Connecticut, 15 miles away, and are laying waste to everything in their path.
What was crucial about Danbury was that flour, weapons, guns were hidden in homes. So they burned homes down. They killed citizens.
To have any chance of holding on to the Hudson Valley, the colonel must rouse the local militia, and fast. But it's late at night, and the messenger is not familiar with the area.
He didn't know where these men lived. The colonel had 400 men tucked away in little dirt rows.
But help comes from a most unexpected quarter.
His daughter, Sybil, said, "Father, send me."
16-year-old Sybil Luddington is the colonel's oldest daughter and known as a highly skilled horsewoman.
She was the only one who knew where to go. There was no one else who could have made that journey that night.
But the young patriot's offer immediately strikes terror in her conflicted father's heart.
What she was facing that night was a very strong possibility of death.
Yet with Danbury burning, the colonel knows he has no choice.
As tough of a decision was, he had to take the chance of sacrificing his oldest daughter.
Sybil mounts her horse and rides off into the night.
There was no question about the difficulty of what she was about to do. But her father, her neighbors, her family's lives were at stake.
Will Sybil rouse the militia in time to stave off the marauding British?
It's April 26th, 1777, the height of the Revolutionary War. British troops have landed at Danbury, Connecticut, and laid waste to the town, vowing to root out the rebels and try them for treason. When 16-year-old Sybil Luddington, whose father is a colonel in the Revolution, hears of the raid, she leaps on her horse and makes a desperate bid to rouse the region's militia. So will Sybil make it through?
Sybil rides through the darkness, stopping at farms and homesteads along the way. And at each, she gives the same urgent cry.
Quickly, muster at the parade grounds. Colonel Luddington needs you. Danbury is burning.
From Carmel to Mahopac, to the village of Stormville, Sybil rides to rally the troops.
Finally, all 400 men were alerted. One of the most amazing things about this ride is that Paul Revere went 12 miles. Sybil went 40. Paul Revere was 40-something. Sybil was barely 16.
And when her journey is complete, she returns home to find hundreds of soldiers gathered on the grounds, ready to march.
It must have been magnificent. Those men had to be screaming huzzah. And her father, who saw his daughter alive and well, her mission accomplished.
Colonel Luddington and his men, joined by 3 other colonial regiments, press on toward Danbury. They block British troops and force them back to their ships.
Luddington and his men pushed him back, and Sybil Luddington helped us to achieve that.
In 1961, a statue of Sybil Luddington is erected in Carmel, just one of the many towns she bravely rode through that night.
Sybil Luddington traveled as far and as fast as Paul Revere. She deserves her place in our American history.
And today, the imposing sculpture of the fierce, tiny figure endures as a testament to her remarkable courage in the face of unimaginable danger. The remote Rocky Mountain town of Nederland, Colorado, stands at more than 8,000 feet above sea level.
We have a beautiful view of the Indian Peaks Wilderness area. The Continental Divide is our backdrop of our community.
But Nederland is best known not for its spectacular vistas, but rather this pedestrian structure that sits on the outskirts of town. A shed.
It's maybe 150 square feet, but there is something special about this shed.
This simple hut has inspired media frenzies, legal struggles, and even festivals. So what lies within the Nederland shed? The 1990s, Nederland, Colorado. For years, this high-altitude haven has boasted a colorful array of local characters.
We do attract a certain element of people who feel like perhaps they're misfits in the rest of the world, but they're going to be accepted here in Nederland.
And no one fits this description more than Norwegian immigrant Odd Morsdal, who lives alone in a house on the outskirts of town. In 1994, Odd applies for a building permit to enlarge her home. But before it can be granted, town officials must conduct an inspection of the property.
What they found was less of a house and more of something that looked like a fortress. There was no running water and no electricity, but it was built to withstand the apocalypse.
In violation of zoning laws, the property is condemned by town officials, and Odd is served with an eviction notice. But the eccentric Scandinavian appeals the decision. And when her case is heard at a town board meeting, she makes a bizarre and disturbing statement.
She'd said, "But who will take care of the bodies?" Mayhem erupted. What bodies is she talking about?
Stunned by her claim that there are bodies on her property, town officials immediately dispatch the local police to investigate.
It was bedlam. Lots of sirens and emergency vehicles.
After conducting an extensive search of her home, police find a brown storage shed in the backyard.
And they open up the doors to see what's inside.
Inside, they find a large styrofoam box about the size of a bed. When they lift the lid, they make an alarming discovery.
And what they find is a frozen, dead body.
So what bizarre deeds have been performed in this humble Colorado shed?
It's 1994 in Nederland, Colorado. 64-year-old Norwegian immigrant Odd Morsdal is in a heap of trouble. Police have found something astonishing in the shed in her backyard, a frozen corpse. So what's this eccentric woman up to?
Inside Odd's shed, police make another shocking discovery, a second frozen body.
Police are horrified, and they demand to know what's going on.
Under interrogation, Odd confesses that one of the bodies is that of her very own father, Bredo Morsdal. The story began 5 years earlier in Norway, when Bredo Morsdal died suddenly of a heart attack. His distraught grandson, Trygve Bauga, who had long believed that medical science would eventually make it possible to resurrect frozen dead bodies, makes a rather unconventional decision: to ship the body to the Trans-Time Cryonics facility in California to be cryonically preserved, a process that uses liquid nitrogen to keep the remains frozen at about -200 degrees Fahrenheit. But preserving Grandpa Bredo in California proved to be expensive. So eventually, Trygve and his mother, Odd, decided to move the body to chilly Nederland, Colorado, to do the preserving themselves.
The family is so intrigued with cryonics, they decide that maybe they want to do a business and store other bodies here cryonically.
And so, as Odd informs police, the second body found in her shed belongs to their first customer, a man named Al from Chicago, who had requested that his body be frozen in his will. After Odd's extraordinary confession, it appears, at the very least, that she has violated local zoning regulations. And while Al's body is sent home to his family in Chicago, the town council eventually determines to allow Odd to keep Grandpa Bredo in her shed in Nederland.
People of the town came to Grandpa's defense and said, "Hey, no, we want him to stay. This is cool. We want him here."
Odd has since moved back to Norway, But the family continues to pay for fresh deliveries of ice to the shed in Netherlands, which is now famous as one of the most unusual mausoleums in America.
We knew that the stigma was never going to go away. We were the place where the frozen dead guy was.
And in 2002, the town launches what is now one of the top small town festivals in the country, Frozen Dead Guy Days.
We have the antique hearse parade, coffin races. It's so much fun.
And every March, when the festival takes place, pilgrims visit the scenic hilltop on the outskirts of town to pay tribute to Grandpa Brado, who still resides in his frosty bed inside this now famous storage shed. Edwards, California, home of the Edwards Air Force Base. For more than 70 years, these high desert flatlands have served as an ideal testing ground for the nation's most iconic aircraft, from U-2 spy planes to the early space shuttle modules. But far from the ear-splitting runways here, in a grove of cottonwood trees, stands a monument to a simple man and a great American hero.
It's a figure wearing an Air Force uniform. It's made of bronze, so it weighs about 500 pounds.
According to aerospace historian Peter Merlin, the statue celebrates one of the most important figures in modern aviation history.
The statue is a fine tribute to a man who changed the face of aerospace forever.
What role did this man play in a daring experiment that revolutionized modern flight? 1941, Hamlin, West Virginia. In this rugged coal mining town deep in the Appalachian Mountains lives an inquisitive teenager named Chuck Yeager. When he's not dismantling engines in his father's garage, Yeager is dreaming of speed.
Chuck Yeager developed an early love of aviation and wanted to be a pilot. And as it turned out, his best route into flying was through the military.
In 1941, 3 months before America entered World War II, Yeager joins the U.S. Army Air Corps, where he quickly impresses his commanding officers.
Yeager was a natural pilot. He didn't have a college degree, but he really understood aerodynamics and flight.
By 1943, at the age of 20, Yeager is a fighter pilot in the European theater. And during the course of World War II, he becomes one of the most decorated flyers in the U.S. Army Air Corps.
A fighter pilot needs to shoot down at least 5 enemy planes to become an ace. Yeager shot down 5 in a single day.
When the war ends, Yeager re-enlists with the U.S. Army Air Corps and is quickly promoted to test pilot on a top-secret project to design and test the fastest plane in history, the Bell X-1.
The X-1 was designed for one mission and one mission only, to fly faster than the speed of sound.
Until this point, pilots who flew at speeds approaching 700 miles per hour, the approximate speed at which sound travels, had reported some disturbing phenomena. As they entered this transonic region, their planes encountered disruptive shock waves, causing many aircraft to break apart in flight. This hazardous speed, above which no plane was known to have survived, became known as the sound barrier.
The Air Force designed an airplane that could fly into the supersonic region, and to be the first one to do it was to take a great risk.
But the risk doesn't bother Chuck Yeager. In fact, he thrives on it.
Flying is exciting, there's no question about it, and the kind of flying he was doing is probably the greatest adrenaline rush of all.
Over the course of numerous test flights, the 24-year-old pilot gradually increases his flight speeds until he is finally ready to try and break the sound barrier.
October 14th, 1947 was Chuck Yeager's date with destiny.
But 2 days before the landmark attempt, disaster strikes. Yeager breaks 2 of his ribs in a horse riding accident. The ambitious young pilot knows that if the Air Force catches wind of his injury, they will oust him from the mission. So to what lengths will Chuck Yeager go to make the historic flight?
October 1947, Lancaster, California. Test pilot Chuck Yeager is preparing to try and break the sound barrier. But 2 days before his historic flight, he fractures his ribs in a horseback riding accident. Despite the excruciating pain, he's determined to hide his injury from the Air Force and complete his landmark mission. But how will he do it?
While Yeager is confident that he can fly the plane effectively, there is one aspect of the mission that he is concerned about. With 2 broken ribs, it will be nearly impossible for him to close the heavy hatch on the X-1 cockpit.
He didn't have the full range of motion in his arm, so he needed a little something extra to get that hatch closed.
To give himself the leverage he will need, Yeager conceals a makeshift tool in his flight suit, a sawed-off broom handle.
Once he squeezes into the cockpit and sits down, he used the broom handle to torque that hatch closed and locked. It was probably a great relief for him to finally settle down in the seat.
But he's not out of the woods yet. The X-1 is designed to be released mid-flight from beneath the belly of a modified B-29 bomber. So as the massive mothership nears 20,000 feet, Yeager girds himself for separation.
They did a countdown, and when they got to 0, the X-1 dropped away. Yeager flipped on the switches to ignite the 4-chamber rocket engine and climbed to altitude.
Leveling off at more than 40,000 feet, Yeager fires his 3rd rocket chamber. And as he enters the turbulent transonic region, the pilot's injured right side begins to throb with pain.
The compression shock built up in front of the aircraft. Pretty soon, the control surfaces began to shake and rattle. Yeager would have felt that through the control stick and through his busted ribs as well.
On the ground, the Air Force brass watch anxiously as the distant orange speck, the X-1, streaks across the clear blue sky.
All they saw was the contrails the plane went over, and then a few minutes later, they felt that sonic boom, shockwave, for the first time ever, and they knew he'd done it. The first person ever to accomplish this. Yeager was the fastest man alive, and he was truly a hero.
Yeager later confides to a friend about his broken ribs, and days later, his commanders find out. But by then, they offer only their admiration. The 24-year-old country boy from the hills of West Virginia would take his place in the history books. Chuck Yeager goes on to have a long and storied career in the Air Force, retiring in 1975 at the rank of Brigadier General. And today, this lifelike monument stands in the aptly named Sound Barrier Park on Yeager Boulevard, reminding visitors to Edwards Air Force Base of one man's remarkable courage and the lengths he went to achieve his dream. 100 miles from the mouth of the Mississippi River is the historic port city of New Orleans. Here, the architecture derives from an eclectic mix of Spanish, Greek Revival, and French origins. And perhaps no landmark embodies this diversity more than this set of red brick structures in the city's beloved French Quarter.
The buildings are really classical Greek buildings, but because of the iron lace, they don't have the forbidding exterior. People in New Orleans today don't realize how innovative they were and how they set the standard for all the ironwork of the city. They really caused New Orleans to look the way it looks.
These are the Pontalba buildings, said to be the oldest apartment complex in the United States. And the tale of how they came to be here is one of the strangest in New Orleans history.
Behind these lovely buildings there lies an ugly story of greed, tragedy, and psychological torment.
What bizarre series of events led to the construction of the magnificent Pontalba buildings? 1811. French nobleman Baron Pontalba is eagerly anticipating the wedding of his son Celestin to a wealthy young New Orleans heiress named Michaela Almonester.
Everybody thought it was just going to be a perfect marriage. They were infatuated with each other. The groom was beautiful, and the bride was rich.
The bride, in fact, is very rich and stands to inherit a vast portfolio of her family's money and property in New Orleans. After the wedding, Baron Pontalba, whose wealth pales in comparison to that of the Almonesters, whisks Michaela and Celestin to France to live with him at the family's ancestral home in Saint-Lys, Chateau Mont-l'Evêque. But no sooner has the couple arrived than the Baron receives a nasty surprise. He had expected to receive a hefty dowry from Michaela's family. But when the dowry is paid, it turns out to be a fraction of what he had expected. So the greedy Baron resorts to more extreme means to access her fortune.
Pontalba began to try to extort more and more of Michaela's property, and her husband Celestin acquiesced in everything his father did.
At times, the Baron even confines the young bride to the chateau and threatens to refuse to let her leave unless she signs away her inheritance. But the young heiress is resolute.
She stood up to him. She refused to give over more of her New Orleans property.
As the years go by, the Baron's actions become increasingly cruel. After the couple's second child is born, the baby boy is removed from her care, and the Baron refuses for a time to disclose his location. Michaela endures decades of torment. Then, one day, in 1834, the ugly familial feud boils over. As the story goes, a maidservant working in the Pontalba household sees the enraged Baron enter Michaela's quarters.
The maid heard him lock each door from the inside. Then, she heard shots.
What terrible fate awaits the much maligned heiress and her greedy father-in-law?
It's 1834 in Senlis, France. For years, New Orleans heiress Michaela Pontalba has lived under the cruel and abusive hand of her father-in-law, Baron Xavier Pontalba, who's persistently demanded that she hand over her family's New Orleans property and fortune.
One day, a servant overhears a fearsome argument between Michaela and the Baron. Then, there are gunshots. So what has become of this persecuted heiress? As Michaela stumbles through the doorway and falls, her maid realizes that she is gravely wounded, with several gunshots to the torso.
Michaela was very, very near death, in excruciating pain.
Then, apparently overcome by the horror of his deed, the Baron turns the weapon on himself and dies. But Michaela, after lingering in a critical state for weeks, miraculously survives. As the heiress gradually recovers, she becomes determined to reestablish her independence. In 1848, at the age of 53, she moves with her now grown children back to her family's home in New Orleans.
She staggered away from that awful marriage, and she was free. She could do whatever she wanted to with her money.
But once back in New Orleans, which had been devastated by a recent financial crash, Michaela is shocked by the dilapidated condition of her native French quarter.
It was a slum And she thought, I can revive this. I can make this the center of the city, and a beautiful center.
Electing to use her vast wealth to help rebuild and restore beauty to the city she loved as a child, the entrepreneurial heiress sets her mind to constructing a magnificent block of apartments on Jackson Square.
This girl had architecture in her soul. She was a late genius, and she constructed the gorgeous Pontalba buildings.
As the years pass, the Pontalba buildings of Jackson Square and their iron mesh balconies form a unique template which is replicated throughout the French Quarter. Although Micaela returned to Paris for the final decades of her life, she will be forever memorialized in New Orleans by these splendid buildings. Mount Pleasant, South Carolina is a quiet community on the Charleston Harbor and is home to the Patriots Point Naval and Maritime Museum, which boasts an impressive fleet of National Historic Landmark ships. But one monument here stands apart from the rest: a hulking, half-submerged vessel protruding out of the ground.
It's an image that is striking, yet beautiful. It's a piece of history.
This memorial honors some of America's most clandestine missions. And at its base stands a gleaming slab of granite, a tribute to one of the country's worst nautical disasters.
It is a terrible tragedy that today is still wrapped in an enigma. No one really knows what happened.
So what is this maritime mystery? And how is this tragedy tied to one of the greatest deep-sea discoveries of all time? 1968, the Cold War. On May 22nd, the USS Scorpion, a nuclear submarine, is heading to the naval station in Norfolk, Virginia, from the North Atlantic.
She started on her way, but she never made it home.
The Navy launches a massive hunt for the missing sub. But after 9 days, the vessel is presumed lost at sea, with all 99 hands on board.
Why did she go down? Was she attacked? The United States was very scared of the Soviet threat.
Could the sub have been sunk by a new top-secret Soviet weapon? 5 months later, the Navy finds something in the Atlantic Ocean, 400 miles south of the Azores Islands. It's the hulking remains of the USS Scorpion, resting 10,000 feet below the ocean's surface. But the technological limitations of the cameras at the time hamper the investigation.
They were able to get some very blurry, very grainy shots of it, but the photographic evidence was not clear enough to really help in the investigation.
It seems the mystery may never be solved. But 14 years later, the case will be blown wide open. 1982, Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Renowned oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard has developed a new machine that he hopes will revolutionize the world of undersea exploration. It's called the Argo, and it's outfitted with high-tech lights and high-resolution cameras.
Deep in the ocean, it is black, it is dark, and this was a tool that would light up the area down there.
And when the Navy learns about this new device, they decide to approach Ballard with a request: to use the Argo to photograph and film the wreck of the USS Scorpion to try and find out why it sank. Ballard accepts the mission on one condition. After he photographs and films the Scorpion, he asks that the Navy fund another mission that has been a lifelong quest of his: to find the final resting spot of a luxury liner that has eluded explorers ever since it sank in 1912.
Titanic was the Everest of the submersible world. It was the big shipwreck.
The Navy agrees, and even sees a way to use Ballard's personal quest to their own advantage.
The cover story was that Bob Ballard was able to do his lifelong dream and go find Titanic.
And so, in the summer of 1985, the undersea explorer sets out on this top-secret expedition. So what will he find?
It's the 1980s. At the request of the U.S. Navy, renowned oceanographer Robert Ballard is on a top-secret mission. Photograph the wreckage of a sunken nuclear sub called the USS Scorpion and find out why she sank. So can Robert Ballard's high-tech images get to the bottom of this mystery?
In the summer of 1985, Ballard's crew spots the downed USS Scorpion. The team begins capturing high-resolution video and still images.
The pictures were the best images that had ever been produced at that time.
And Ballard's data reveals that the hull of the vessel is broken into two main pieces. But other than that, the wreckage is largely intact. Navy investigators conclude that something forced the sub to sink below crush depth, and it imploded. The question is, what? One long-standing theory is that a Russian torpedo shot down the sub. But Ballard's photos do not show any obvious torpedo scars on the hull.
It would have caused a tremendous amount of explosive damage, so Ballard's pictures effectively ruled that theory out.
So if it wasn't a Russian torpedo, what sent the Scorpion plummeting 10,000 feet to the ocean depths? The answer may lie with the pressures of the Cold War. According to newly declassified documents, the Navy was so intent on deploying the stealthy craft that it cut the time of allotted regular maintenance from 24 to just 8 months.
There are theories that perhaps the maintenance was rushed on the vessel. Because it was the Cold War, she had to get back out to service.
But the investigators cannot be sure.
What really happened to the Scorpion is still a mystery. We really don't know.
With his job for the Navy complete, Ballard moves on to his next mission, the search for the Titanic. And on September 1st, 1985, Ballard, with the help of the Argo, detects a debris trail in the North Atlantic. Shortly after, Ballard spies the long-lost Titanic, the watery tomb of 1,500 souls lying 12,450 feet below the ocean surface. The 73-year-old mystery is finally put to rest. But it will be more than 20 years before it is publicly revealed that Ballard's quest for the Titanic was intrinsically tied to a top-secret naval mission. And today, this granite marker at the Cold War Submarine Memorial is a sobering tribute to those who lost their lives on the USS Scorpion, and a reminder of how one man, in an attempt to solve one mystery, solved another. From a sideshow swindler to a frozen forebearer, a sunken submarine to a hamstrung heiress.
I'm Don Wildman, and these are Monumental Mysteries.
55 miles north of Manhattan, in the hills of the Hudson Valley, is Carmel, New York. A quaint town that boasts an impressive assortment of historical sites and relics. And one of its star attractions is an imposing bronze sculpture that celebrates an unlikely hero in the battle for independence.
This girl really played a very important part of a war effort, and it was a remarkable feat.
1777. The American Revolution is in its second year, and many colonists who once swore allegiance to the British Crown have now sided with the rebels. Among them is Colonel Henry Ludington of New York, who commands the 7th Regiment Dutchess County Militia.
Colonel Henry Ludington had fought in the French and Indian War for the British. Life for the colonists changed a great deal when the Revolution happened. Colonel Ludington's life changed, and his allegiance to the British changed to his allegiance to his country.
And though he was once a captain in the most formidable army of the day, as a colonel of the militia, Ludington now oversees a band of 400 inexperienced fighters.
This was a volunteer army, and he had to train these farmers to be soldiers.
Ludington is also charged with protecting the region from a group of bandits known as the Cowboys, pro-British raiders who steal cattle and horses from local farms to supply the Redcoat Army.
He was the colonel of the militia, and in that role, he was sort of the chief of police of territory. He would chase cowboys. He was so good at his job that the British wanted this man dead.
And on April 26th, as Ludington prepares to confront the men who have put a bounty on his head, he receives still more troubling news. The British are attacking Danbury, Connecticut, just 15 miles away. The officer must immediately gather his troops and prepare them to fight.
It was crucial that he get those men over there as quickly as possible.
And much to the colonel's surprise, it's said that his oldest daughter, 16-year-old Sybil Ludington, suddenly steps forward and volunteers to alert her father's soldiers. The small girl sounds the alarm in neighboring towns, riding 40 miles in the dark night.
It was a struggle to be able to see, to be able to ride, and who knows what's out there. But she was off to do an important American mission.
And today, the statue of Sybil Ludington, often called the female Paul Revere, is a reminder of the young patriot who bravely joined her father's side in the American battle for independence. The iconic Pontalba buildings of New Orleans were designed by the famous heiress and lay architect Micaela Pontalba. But few people realize they were conceived out of the ruins of one of the worst marriages in history. 1834, Senlis, France. Micaela Pontalba is shot and critically wounded by her sadistic father-in-law, Baron Xavier Pontalba, who later takes his own life. The heiress remains in critical condition for weeks, but gradually recovers. Finally, when she is well enough to travel, she is determined to make a clean break from her husband, Celestin. So she moves to Paris and applies for a formal separation. But Micaela is in for a cruel surprise.
The separation was denied. Now, you would think that being shot by your father-in-law and having to live with him with that kind of harassment would be enough to get somebody a separation, but not in 19th century France.
But finally, after an exhaustive legal battle, she gets what she wants.
Because Celestin continued to persecute her, after about a year and a half, the judges were so sick of the Pontalba trial that they did grant her a separation.
Micaela is now free to assume control of her property and to move back to her native New Orleans. There she sets to work designing the magnificent block of apartments that become known as the Pontalba buildings.
Their rhythms, their poetry, they captured what had eluded her in life.
The stunning red brick buildings with their exquisite cast iron balconies are unlike anything built in New Orleans before.
She built those buildings and she made it into one of the most lovely architectural complexes in America.
Incredibly, despite her autonomy and stunning architectural success in New Orleans, Micaela allows herself to become once again enmeshed in her husband's disordered affairs back in France. When Celestin becomes mentally unstable, he turns to his long-suffering wife for help.
Celestin was a sick imbecile, helpless. She took care of him, that worthless creature, for another 23 years, day and night.
So today, this noble and remarkable soul, who might have accomplished much more in her life, will be forever memorialized by these splendid buildings in New Orleans.